Pentrex is proud to present B&O Odyssey Volume 1. Linking 13 great states with the nation. That was the slogan of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Our journey begins in May 1954. A B&O articulated steam engine roars along the Beaver River through Youngstown, Ohio, with a westbound freight. B&O passenger train number 254, eastbound through Butler, Pennsylvania, crosses the Pennsylvania Railroad at Butler Junction. The train is en route from Pittsburgh to Buffalo, New York. A 282 pulls a westbound local freight. The B&O Roundhouse in Butler is a hub of steam activity. Armco Steel has a huge plant in Butler with its own industrial railroad. A rare Westinghouse diesel number B71 is growling up grade as it pushes an Armco crane and some loads of foundry sand. At the crest, the self-propelled crane and a gondola uncouple and move ahead. The B-71 follows, pushing the remaining cars. In September 1954, we set up at the ore dock in Lorain, Ohio. Engines are moving hopper loads of iron ore from the Lorain ore dock to a large yard south of town. The light engines are going back to the dock for more loads. Here, the hopper cars are crossing over the Nickel Plate Road in Lorain's downtown area. The Lorain ore dock is located on the Black River, which flows into Lake Erie. Another train of iron ore is coming off the dock. The ore is very heavy and cannot be seen from this angle. 12 cars are the limit for movements through town. The dock has a hewlett to offload ore from the lake boats directly into the hoppers. Ore is also stockpiled on the ground to be loaded into hoppers after the boats have left. A locomotive backs to pick up another 12 hoppers of iron ore. These loads are moved to a large yard south of Lorain, then made up into full road trains. The Lorain dock also has a coal dumper, seen beyond and to the left of the hewlett. The iron ore trains are destined for steel mills in Ohio and Pennsylvania. After the hewlett has finished offloading ore, some of the boats will move under the coal dumper to load coal for power plants and steel mills on the Great Lakes. Empty coal hoppers are made into a train which will run to the coal mines in Ohio and West Virginia. A Class EM1 articulated locomotive rides the turntable at the Lorain Roundhouse. Two 884s such as this one are used on the loaded ore and coal trains. In 1955, a pair of brand new GP9s is heading south at Rossford Yard in Toledo, Ohio. These units were built to run long hood forward. This is B&O Train 53, the Cincinnatian. A freight comes out of Rossford Yard headed up by a Class Q Mikado. South of Rossford, E units pull an excursion extra. This train departed from Detroit and made a stop in Toledo. It's an annual run taking students on their spring break to visit Washington, D.C. and tour the capital's historic treasures. An 080 switcher is being turned at the Rossford Roundhouse. Visible in one of the stalls is one of 4 streamlined Pacific-type steam engines assigned to the Cincinnatian. A Big 6 is approaching the coal tipple at Rossford Yard. This is a Santa Fe type, meaning it has a 2-10-2 wheel arrangement. These large Class S1 locomotives were built by both Baldwin and Lima Locomotive Works. They were nicknamed Big Sixes because of their 6000 series numbers. We get away from an outbound crew as its caboose passes a standpipe. A Big 6 is taking on water. The engineer takes a few minutes to oil around. A yard switchman has a few words with the engineer. Meanwhile, a yard engine makes a move. The Big 6 backs into Rossford Yard to pick up its train. Let's watch an 080 yard switcher at work. Switching coal hoppers is slow and delicate work. 6 cars of coal at a time have to be treated gently. The 080 switchers were converted from B&O consolidation type 280 engines. The conversions were all done in B&O shops. The leading wheels and the pilot were removed and front steps were added. A Big 6 210-2 comes around the curve, with a train of coal to be delivered to the Toledo dock for industries on the Great Lakes. At Vickers Junction in Toledo, the New York Central Main Line crosses the Toledo Terminal track. The B&O uses the Toledo Terminal Railroad for access to the coal docks and other industries. The Big 6 we saw earlier returns to Rossford Yard cab hop. Another Big 6 pulls a train of loaded Chesapeake and Ohio coal hoppers to the Toledo dock. South of Wyandotte, Michigan, we find the B&O Cincinnatian still using steam power in 1955. The passenger equipment is all matched and clean, with a full-service diner. The Cincinnatian runs between Detroit and Cincinnati. It uses New York Central trackage between Detroit and Toledo and runs on B&O between Toledo and Cincy. Here the train is passing under the West Road Bridge in Trenton, Michigan. South of Trenton, train number 20, the Ambassador, passes at a casual speed on its run from Detroit to Washington, D.C. On another day, the Cincinnatian passes by at track speed. At the rear is an express car, which will be set out at Deschler, Ohio. By March of 1958, steam is no longer visible in Toledo's Rossford yard. Approaching slowly is a Detroit terminal diesel switcher that's on loan to the B&O. At FN Tower in Trenton, Michigan, we spot New York Central train number 384, a daily commuter connection between Detroit and Toledo. After the next timetable change, number 384 will cease operation due to declining ridership. Following soon after the commuter is a B&O Extra, the Cherry Blossom Special. This 14-car consist is carrying high school seniors from Detroit to Washington, D.C. on their graduation trip. The train is an annual tradition, full of joy and excitement for the youngsters. As darkness approaches, a second Cherry Blossom Special appears. This one has 10 cars with Alco FA and EMD units in the lead. In the summer of 1962, a B&O local freight arrives at Bates Tower on Toledo Terminal trackage. As the freight makes a full 180-degree turn, we can briefly glimpse Bates Tower on the right. The train is now entering Rossford Yard. As the freight passes, we look south to see a Toledo terminal engine and caboose on the far track, adjacent to Rossford Yard. A B&O coal run to the Toledo dock crosses the New York Central track at Vickers Junction. The NYC line has been reduced from 4 to 2 tracks at the crossing. A Chesapeake and Ohio unit leads a B&O freight south at Vickers Junction. Perrysburg, Ohio is south of Toledo. It's 1962 and the station is no longer open for passengers. The southbound Cincinnatian passes by with 6 cars of mail. 3 of these mail cars will be set off at Deschler. The other 3 are for Cincinnati. Coming across the Maumee River Bridge, on its run to Detroit, the Cincinnatian is now arriving at Central Union Terminal in Toledo. On the west side, the Cincinnatian snakes out of the station, heading north to Detroit. A southbound Cincinnatian has just departed Toledo Central Union Terminal. Wabash Tower, controlled by the New York Central, is seen on the left. The train is about to cross the Maumee River Bridge. Now let's look at the same action on another day. As the southbound Cincy starts through the Maumee River Bridge, note the switch and signal to the left. This is where B&O trains turn off the New York Central line to run on their own rails. The girder bridge overhead belongs to the Pennsylvania Railroad. The young man in the center drops some debris on the E-Unit's roof. On the point of this train is the last of 7 E6 locomotives bought by B&O. The train is passing JN Tower. Here the B&O connects with nickel plate track for freight service to Rossford Yard. On the same day, a Detroit-bound Cincinnatian has passed JN Tower and is approaching New York Central track. That's a rail fan on the bridge overhead, so the crew need not fear falling objects. This Cincinnatian is moving along at a faster clip. Autumn of '62 has given way to a cold winter. Cincinnati-bound train number 53 is pulled by an E9 and a GP7. Jeeps with steam heating equipment are used frequently on the chilly Detroit to Cincinnati runs. The northbound Cincy, approaching JN Tower, passes under 2 Warren Truss bridges. The closer bridge is owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad, while the distant bridge carries the New York Central line to Fostoria, Ohio. With the Cincy in the distance, JN Tower has cleared a nickel plate road Fairbanks-Moore switcher into its yard. A Detroit-bound Cincy comes off the Maumee River Bridge to enter Toledo Central Union Terminal. The train passes New York Central's Wabash Tower, which controls access to Pileman Yard. As the power goes by, we see that the lead locomotive has the classic B&O colors, while the trailing unit has a new simplified paint scheme. It's unusual for this train to carry railway express cars on the rear. A pair of Wabash switchers and a caboose are crossing the NYC to Pileman Yard to pick up a few cars. Departing Central Union Terminal, NYC passenger train number 6, the Fifth Avenue, is sporting the modern cigar band Herald on the locomotives. With the Cincinnatian coming across the Maumee River Bridge, a Pennsylvania freight can be seen as it crosses over the NYC track on the east side of the river. Hot on the trail of the Cincy, a B&O Extra crosses the bridge. It's a baseball special taking fans to a Detroit Tigers night game. Next, we move to Fostoria, Ohio in the summer of 1963. Tracks of the B&O, C&O, Nickel Plate Road, and New York Central cross at Fostoria. Guarding the intersection is F Tower. There's also a B&O station located nearby, which we'll glimpse later. Westbound B&O passenger train number 7, the Shenandoah, arrives at Fostoria. This train will set out cars for Cincinnati and Detroit at Deschler, Ohio. A Chesapeake and Ohio coal train heads north to Toledo. After the train crosses the B&O Diamonds, it begins gathering speed for curves and a slight grade ahead. Next, a New York Central switcher and 3 freight cars cross the C&O tracks. Now, a B&O switcher runs past F Tower. As the switcher goes about its work, a B&O westbound freight passes with white flags, indicating that this is an extra train. Another freight shows up with 5 units on the point, some of which are in tow. They are bound for the electromotive division of General Motors to be traded in on new diesels. 2 more units are being hauled in mid-train. Our next train is a rare sight. Alco PAs pulling nickel plate train number 7, the Westerner, over C&O and NYC diamonds. The train slows gently for its stop at Fostoria. The Shenandoah arrives on another day. As it approaches the C&O and NYC diamonds, it slows with Baltimore blue smoke billowing from the brakes. This is the station sign at Fostoria. The sign for the waiting room is quite an antique, even in 1963. An eastbound freight with a consist of wood refrigerator cars runs through Fostoria. As the caboose passes, the conductor gives a long wave to the F-Tower operator. The Shenandoah arrives at Fostoria Station with a lone passenger at the shelter. After a brief pause, the Shenandoah slowly departs through 2 road crossings, then opens the throttle to get out of town. A westbound local passes the station. The GP9 has its long hood leading, which is standard B&O practice. This train has a total of 3 cabooses in the consist. A B&O switcher moves a cut of 5 cars. As the switcher recedes into the distance, we catch sight of a brakeman enjoying the view. An eastbound freight passes a switcher parked on the siding at Fostoria. The white flag indicates another extra movement. Approaching F-Tower, a following train is led by a pair of Bessemer and Lake Erie units on loan to the B&O. A cold winter Sunday in 1963 has the Cincinnatian running without mail or express cars through Delray, Michigan. On another winter Sunday, this one without snow, a private car brings up the rear of the Cincinnatian. Snow is on the ground again. This time, the Cincy has mail and express cars in the consist. The train will be stopping at Deschler, Ohio. Six miles south of Delray is the former Wyandotte Station, now an American Legion post. The flag is at half-mast in memory of the late President John F. Kennedy. The Cincinnatian passing through blows a low whistle out of respect for the flag and the president. North of Wyandotte Station is Rouge Tower, which controls the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton Railroad. Passing by is the Detroit-bound Cincinnatian. The Cincy is cruising north of the New York Central's FN Tower. The Cincy slows as it approaches the River Rouge Bascule Bridge and Bridge Tower. Outbound from Detroit in early 1964, the Cincy passes Junction Yard storage tracks. The train will be at Delray in 3 minutes. Coming through Delray, the train will get a friendly wave from the Bridge Tower operator. South of Wyandotte, the Cincinnatian kicks up a dust cloud. North of Trenton, Michigan is train number 20, the eastbound Ambassador. A GP9 leads the Cincinnatian through FN Junction in Trenton. The tall chimney belongs to a whiskey distillery that was shut down in 1918. Another Cincy rounds the curve, approaching Trenton, Michigan. In Rockwood, Michigan, the Cincy passes the old Lakeshore and Michigan Southern station. New York Central is offering the old station for sale. In Monroe, the former Lakeshore and Michigan Southern tracks run right through town. Maximum speed 25 miles per hour. At Alexis Tower, the Cincinnatian will pick up orders before switching to another track and proceeding into Toledo. West Detroit Tower is where B&O trains come off the Chicago line of the New York Central and onto the Toledo line. As it passes by, the Cincy meets a C&O freight going to Windsor, Canada, by way of the Detroit River Tunnel. Before leaving West Detroit Tower, we see a pair of Lightning Stripe E units roll by. The Michigan Central Terminal in Detroit is the largest station in Michigan. The yard is a busy place in October of 1964. The B&O Cincinnatian, train number 53, leaves here at 10:45 a.m. Today is special, for this is the last departure of train 53 from this station. Tomorrow, the Cincinnatian will begin departing from Detroit's Fort Street Union Station. The station transfer is a result of the May 1963 merger of the Baltimore and Ohio and Chesapeake and Ohio railroads. The C&O became the controlling partner. Since C&O has an alliance with the Fort Street Union Station, it made good business sense to move the B&O train there. Early in the evening of the same day, B&O train number 54, the northbound Cincinnatian, arrives on its last run to the Michigan Central Terminal. Later tonight, B&O will gather its cars and equipment and move across town to Fort Street Union Station for its first scheduled departure on C&O track the following morning. B&O Power is making its move as the Central's Twilight Limited departs for Chicago. And with this, we bid farewell to the Michigan Central Terminal. Fort Street Union Station is 30 years older than the Michigan Central Terminal, but the Baltimore and Ohio trains are acquainted with age and fit nicely with the Chesapeake and Ohio and Norfolk and Western passenger trains, as well as the Detroit skyline. The station switcher is moving cars off B&O train number 58, the Night Express. The switcher has coupled to some cars for train number 15, the evening train to Grand Rapids. The Pennsylvania Railroad once had passenger service out of Union Station, but it ended in the early 1960s. Penske's freight operations continue. Now we prepare for the first run of the B&O Cincinnatian on the C&O route. As the Cincy rolls out of the station, the Penske freight goes back to work. The move of the Cincy to C&O track did not end B&O's obligation to New York Central's trackage rights agreement. To meet a contract requirement, B&O must operate one train per week from Toledo on NYC rails. To minimize costs, B&O chose to run a rail diesel car on Saturdays only. This is the RDC on its first run through Delray Junction in November 1964. We hope you've enjoyed this look at the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Join us for Volume 2 as our B&O Odyssey continues. Watch for more exciting programs from Pentrex. Pentrex is proud to present Southern Pacific Film Archives Volume 1. Daylights, cab forwards, and early diesels. From the vaults of the Southern Pacific Railroad comes an exciting collection of rare vintage film. Experience the majesty of the famous daylight trains racing along the California coast. This is footage that has never been seen by the public. You'll see the original wood depot in San Luis Obispo and some truly rare trains, like the Noon Daylight, shortly after it was inaugurated in 1940. Here, train number 96 is arriving at the halfway point of its journey. Meanwhile, in Texas, the Sunbeam was running between Dallas and Houston in a daylight-inspired paint scheme. Relive the days of the mighty cab forwards. We've discovered some awesome footage featuring these brutes pulling heavy freight trains on the coastline and struggling up to Tehachapi Pass with mid-train and rear-end helpers. This eastbound drag is pulling out of the siding at Marcel with a 282 helper partway back and another cab forward just ahead of the caboose. Cab forwards pulled passenger trains too. Long trains of heavyweight equipment. And the streamlined Treasure Island Special, an all-Pullman train that ran between Chicago and San Francisco during a World's Fair in 1939 and 1940. As steam gave way to diesels, a dramatic transition in railroading took place. You'll see many of SP's first-generation diesels, like these PAs on the Shasta Daylight. E6s on the City of San Francisco crossing the Great Salt Lake Trestle. And E7s on the Sunset Limited, cruising by Picacho Peak in Arizona. You'll see early diesels hauling freight too, like these Fairbanks Morse Trainmasters, along with a Jeep descending Cuesta Grade with a loaded sugar beet train. SP had only 3 General Electric U-50s. Here we catch one of them on the point of a westbound. And Black Widow F units roll past the camera in 3 and 4 unit sets. This is an astonishing collection that will thrill every rail enthusiast. Be sure to see Southern Pacific Film Archives Volume 1. Daylights, cab